I've spent most of my life driving long distances for work, and I've traveled nearly every major highway across the state. There's something calming about being on the road for hours, watching the scenery change, the hum of the tires beneath you. But one night on Highway 22, something happened that I still can't explain, and it's left me with questions that no one seems to have answers for. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was heading home from a job site in the next town over. Highway 22 runs through a pretty isolated area, long stretches of road with nothing but fields and woods for miles. There aren't many cars on that route after dark, and on this particular night, I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. The only light came from my headlights slicing through the darkness ahead. After a while, I noticed a figure on the side of the road. At first I thought it was an animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a man standing at the edge of the highway, his thumb out like he was trying to hitch a ride. I slowed down as I approached, instinctively, but something about the way he was standing made me hesitate. He was tall and lanky, dressed in what looked like an old military jacket. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, and his posture was stiff, almost unnatural. But what really unsettled me was the fact that he wasn't looking at the road. He was facing the woods, his back turned to the highway, even though he was sticking his thumb out for a ride. Against my better judgment, I stopped the car a few feet ahead of him and rolled down the window slightly. "Hey, you need a ride?" I called out. The man didn't respond. He didn't even turn around. Something about the silence felt heavy, wrong. I was about to drive off when, slowly, the man turned to face me. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was being pulled by invisible strings. As his face came into view, I felt my stomach drop. His eyes were wide and glassy, unfocused, like he wasn't fully aware of where he was. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his lips were slightly parted, but no words came out. He just stared at me, his thumb still raised, but he didn't step toward the car. My hand hovered over the gear shift, ready to leave, but something about his expression, it was like he was pleading with me. Even though he hadn't said a word, I could feel the desperation rolling off him. Before I could decide whether to stay or go, he finally spoke. "Don't go down that road," he said, his voice low and hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "You won't come back." A chill ran through me. I glanced at the empty road stretching out ahead of me. There was nothing out there, just miles of highway, dark and still. I looked back at the man, confused. "What are you talking about?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just kept staring, his thumb still out, as if he hadn't just spoken at all. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I pulled away, my heart racing, leaving the strange man behind me on the roadside. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong, but I couldn't turn around either. I just wanted to get home. A few miles down the highway, the road became even more isolated. The trees on either side seemed to close in, their branches hanging low, casting long shadows across the asphalt. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness, and the air around me felt heavier, colder. I had driven this road dozens of times before, but that night it felt like I was somewhere else entirely. Then, out of nowhere, my car started to sputter. The engine whined and choked, and before I knew it, the car slowed to a crawl and finally came to a stop in the middle of the road. I sat there, stunned, my heart pounding in my chest as the engine died completely. I tried to restart the car, but it wouldn't turn over. The dashboard lights flickered, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was completely alone, stranded on an empty stretch of highway, with no cell service and no idea how far I was from the nearest town. My mind raced, replaying the words the man had said. "You won't come back." I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Cars break down. It happens. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. Then I saw it. In the rearview mirror, a figure stepped out of the woods. It was the same man, the hitchhiker. But this time, something was different. His movements were slow, almost robotic, as he walked toward my car. His head was tilted slightly, and his arms hung limply at his sides. He didn't look like someone who was asking for help anymore. He looked like someone, or something, that was following me. I didn't wait to see what he would do. I fumbled with my keys, trying the ignition again, and to my relief, the car sputtered to life. I floored the gas, speeding down the highway as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I don't know how long I drove after that. Time felt distorted, like I was stuck in a loop. The trees blurred together, the road seemed to stretch on forever, and every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see that man standing there staring back at me. Eventually, I reached the outskirts of the next town, and the heaviness in the air seemed to lift. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a long time, my hands shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that my mind had been playing tricks on me. But when I asked the locals about Highway 22, one of the older men at the gas station gave me a strange look. "You shouldn't be driving down that road at night," he said quietly. "Not after what happened to those people." "What people?" I asked, my throat dry. "Couple years back, there was a wreck. Car went off the road into the woods. They never found the driver, just the passenger wandering around in the trees. He'd lost his mind, babbling about how the road doesn't let you leave." I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want to know. To this day, I avoid Highway 22. I've told a few people about what happened, but no one believes me. They think I was just tired, that I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget the look on that man's face when he told me not to go down that road, because I don't think I was supposed to come back. I've always loved riding my motorcycle. There's a sense of freedom you get on two wheels that you can't get in a car. The wind in your face, the open road stretching out in front of you. But now, whenever I go out for a ride, especially at night, I can't shake the memory of what happened last summer. I was coming back from a weekend trip in the mountains, taking the long way home to enjoy the ride. It was late, around 10 p.m., when I hit a desolate stretch of highway that cuts through miles of open desert. The road was empty, the only light coming from my bike's headlamp and the occasional glow of distant stars. I didn't mind. Riding solo at night was something I'd done plenty of times before. About half an hour into the ride, I noticed something in my mirrors. It was faint at first, a tiny speck of light far behind me. Another bike, maybe, or a car. Nothing unusual, just someone else on the road. As I continued, I noticed that the light behind me wasn't fading. In fact, it seemed to be getting closer, slowly but surely. I figured it was just another biker who happened to be on the same stretch of road. But after a few minutes, it became clear that something wasn't right. The light wasn't catching up to me at a normal pace. It was hanging back, just far enough that I could see it in my mirrors, but not close enough to make out any details. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us, but the light stayed with me, always maintaining the same distance. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just keeping a safe distance. But the longer it went on, the more uneasy I felt. I slowed down, giving them every opportunity to pass me, but they didn't. They stayed back, just far enough to keep me in their sights. Something about the way they were riding didn't feel right. Most bikers will either speed up to pass or keep a steady distance behind you, but this rider wasn't doing either. It was like they were stalking me, watching my every move. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. I looked at my fuel gauge, half a tank left. Enough to make it to the next town, but not enough for me to feel comfortable if things went wrong. I started scanning the horizon for any sign of civilization, but all I saw was the endless stretch of desert and asphalt. Then the light behind me disappeared. 1 second, it was there, a steady glow in my mirrors. The next, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the rider pulling up beside me, but there was nothing, just the empty highway stretching out behind me. I slowed down, confused. Had they turned off? There hadn't been any exits for miles. Maybe they had stopped or pulled off to the side of the road, but there was no sign of them anywhere. For a few minutes I rode in silence, the uneasy feeling in my gut slowly fading. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, or maybe they'd just decided to turn around. I started to relax, letting the wind clear my head. That's when I heard it. The low, steady rumble of an engine, so quiet at first that I wasn't sure if it was real. But as I listened, it grew louder, closer, like someone was creeping up behind me. I glanced in my mirrors again, and my heart skipped a beat. There it was. The light, back again, only this time it was much closer. I tightened my grip on the handlebars, my pulse quickening. Whoever was behind me, they weren't playing around anymore. They were closing in and fast. I sped up, hoping to shake them, but the rumble of their engine matched mine, the light growing brighter in my mirrors. They were right behind me now, so close I could almost feel the heat from their engine. My bike roared as I pushed it to its limit, but no matter how fast I went, they stayed right on my tail, their headlamp blinding me in the mirrors. I veered into the left lane, hoping to get some distance, but they followed, their bike swerving in perfect sync with mine. I tried to think of what to do. Should I stop? Pull over? But the thought of being alone on the side of the highway with this person sent a jolt of fear through me. Then, without warning, they swerved into the opposite lane, pulling up beside me. I glanced over, my heart hammering in my chest. The rider was wearing a helmet with a dark visor, so I couldn't see their face, but there was something off about the way they were sitting. Their posture was stiff, their movements jerky, like they weren't used to riding. They didn't look at me, they just kept their bike steady next to mine, matching my speed exactly. For a few terrifying seconds we rode side by side, the rumble of our engines the only sound in the night. I could feel the adrenaline surging through me, every instinct telling me to get away. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they swerved back behind me and disappeared again. The road was empty. No lights, no sound, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I didn't stop riding until I reached the next town, pulling into a gas station and parking under the bright lights. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing from the encounter. I waited there for a long time, half expecting the other rider to pull in behind me, but they never did. I've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe it was just some reckless biker messing with me, trying to scare me for fun, but there was something about the way they rode, something unnatural, that makes me think it wasn't just a prank. I don't ride at night anymore, especially not on empty highways. I've never been one to believe in supernatural things or bizarre conspiracy theories, but what happened to me last year on Route 67 still leaves me questioning everything I thought I knew. It's been months now, and I've replayed it in my head countless times, but no matter how I try to rationalize it, I can't explain what happened that night. I was driving home from a work trip. It had been a long day, and by the time I left the last meeting, it was already past 10 p.m. I was exhausted, and the drive back was going to take me a few hours, so I decided to take Route 67, a quieter, back-road highway that cuts through a series of small towns and rural farmland. I'd driven that route plenty of times before, but always during the day. At night, it's a different story. Pitch black, with nothing but the occasional streetlight or the glow of a farmhouse in the distance. I turned on the radio to keep myself awake, flipping through stations. Most of them were static. Out here in the middle of nowhere, there wasn't much signal, and the only channels that came through were country music or old talk shows. After driving for about an hour, something strange happened. I was scanning through stations again when the static suddenly stopped. A voice came through, crisp and clear, like it was coming from a nearby station. The thing is, it wasn't music or a commercial. It was a man's voice reading something, but it wasn't like any radio show I'd ever heard. At 2:07 a.m. the car will break down. Do not get out. Do not respond." I froze, my hand still on the dial, as the voice continued. "You are being watched. Stay inside the vehicle." The voice was calm, steady, almost mechanical. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was just past midnight. I told myself it was a prank, some kind of creepy local radio show trying to scare late-night drivers. But something about the tone, the clarity of the voice, unsettled me. It didn't sound like a broadcast. It sounded like someone was speaking directly to me. I tried to shake it off, but then the voice said something that made my blood run cold. "Route 67 is not safe. Do not stop. Do not turn back." It was like the radio was warning me. My heart started racing. I turned the dial, trying to find another station. But the moment I moved away from the voice, all I got was static. I flipped back, and the man's voice was still there, continuing as though I hadn't left. "At 2:07 a.m., do not open the door." My hands were sweating now. I turned off the radio, hoping that would stop the eerie transmission, but the silence in the car only made things worse. The darkness outside felt oppressive, the road stretching endlessly in front of me. I tried to focus on driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. For the next hour, I kept glancing at the clock. 2:07 a.m. Why that time? What was supposed to happen? I told myself it was just a weird coincidence, that I was overthinking it. But as 2 a.m. approached, the tension in my chest grew worse. Then, at exactly 2:07 a.m., my car sputtered. The engine made a loud, choking noise, and the dashboard lights flickered. My stomach dropped. I tapped the gas, but the car slowed down, rolling to a stop right in the middle of the highway. My heart was pounding now. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the dark road ahead. The words from the radio echoed in my mind. "Do not get out. Do not respond." I tried to restart the car. The engine cranked, but it wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again. Nothing. The headlights dimmed, leaving me in near total darkness. My phone had no signal, and there wasn't a single car on the road. I wanted to get out, to check the engine, but those words kept playing in my head. "Do not get out." I locked the doors, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The highway was completely silent, save for the soft hum of the cooling engine. I sat there, breathing heavily, waiting for something to happen, for anything to make sense. Then, in the distance, I saw headlights. At first, I felt a wave of relief. Finally, another car. Maybe I could get some help. But as the headlights grew closer, something about the way the car moved set me on edge. It was swerving slightly, like the driver wasn't in control. The vehicle slowed as it neared me, coming to a stop about 50 feet away. I squinted through the darkness, trying to make out the car, but I couldn't see the driver. The windows were too dark, the headlights too blinding. Then the radio turned back on by itself. The man's voice came through the speakers again, clear as day. "Do not get out of the car." I didn't move. I barely breathed. The car sat there, its engine idling softly. I couldn't see inside, couldn't make out any details, but I knew whoever was in that car wasn't there to help me. Suddenly, the door of the other car opened. A figure stepped out, tall, slim, dressed in dark clothing. I couldn't make out the face, but the way they moved, slow and deliberate, sent a shiver down my spine. They stood there for a moment, staring at my car, before taking a step toward me. I locked the doors, my heart racing, the man's words from the radio blaring in my mind. "Do not open the door." The figure took another step, then another, moving slowly but steadily in my direction. I fumbled with my phone, desperately trying to get a signal, but there was nothing. I was trapped, completely alone on a dark stretch of highway, with this figure closing in on me. Then, just as the figure reached the edge of my headlights, they stopped. For a long, tense moment, they just stood there staring at me through the windshield. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. And then, without warning, they turned and walked back to their car. The door slammed shut, the engine roared to life, and the car sped off into the night, disappearing down the highway as quickly as it had appeared. I sat there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My car was still dead, and the highway was dark and empty once more. But then, without me touching it, the radio crackled to life one last time. "Stay on Route 67. Do not turn back." I didn't sleep that night. Eventually, another driver came by and I was able to get a tow back to the nearest town. I told the mechanic what happened, but he just shrugged and said it was probably a random engine failure. But I knew that wasn't it. I don't drive Route 67 anymore. I take the long way around, even if it adds hours to my trip. And I've never told anyone what happened that night. Not really, because I know they wouldn't believe me. But I can't stop wondering, who was that voice on the radio and why did it know what would happen to me? This happened to me a few years ago, and I still think about it every time I'm driving alone at night. I've always loved long drives. There's something calming about being on the open road, especially late at night when there's barely any traffic. But now I can't go more than an hour on a highway without feeling that same creeping sense of dread I felt that night. It was around 1 a.m., and I was heading home from a friend's place about 3 hours away. I didn't want to stay the night, so I decided to drive back even though it was late. The highway I was taking was mostly empty, a 2-lane stretch that cut through miles of farmland and wooded areas. The occasional passing car was the only sign of life. About an hour into the drive, I noticed a car behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. People drive late all the time. But after a few minutes, I realized the car wasn't passing me. They were just sitting there, matching my speed, staying directly behind me no matter how much I sped up or slowed down. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, trying to get a better look at the car. It was an older sedan, its headlights bright and blinding in my mirrors, but I couldn't see the driver's face, just the outline of a figure behind the wheel, too far back to make out any details. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were tired or distracted, and I was just reading too much into it. I sped up a little more, hoping they would either pass me or drop back, but they didn't. They stayed right on my tail, almost like they were toying with me. The weird thing was, there was plenty of room to pass. The highway was wide open, not another car in sight, yet this person refused to move. I started to feel uneasy. I kept checking my mirrors, my heart rate picking up as I realized they were intentionally staying behind me. I'd heard stories about road rage incidents or people messing with drivers late at night, but I never thought I'd be the one experiencing it. Finally, I decided to switch lanes and slow down, giving them every opportunity to pass me. I signaled, changed lanes, and dropped my speed, figuring they would finally go around. But they didn't. They slowed down too, staying directly behind me, matching my every move. At this point, my unease turned into outright fear. This wasn't normal. I had no idea what this person wanted or why they were following me, but I knew I needed to get away from them. I sped up again, this time pushing my car well over the speed limit. The highway stretched out ahead of me, long and empty, but the car behind me kept up with every turn, every acceleration. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I was trapped. I couldn't pull over. Stopping on a desolate highway in the middle of the night with someone like this behind me felt like asking for trouble. I couldn't outrun them either. They weren't going anywhere. Then I saw the sign for a rest stop up ahead. It wasn't much, just one of those tiny, unlit stops with a single bathroom and a vending machine. But it was something. Maybe if I pulled in, they would just drive past and leave me alone. As I approached the exit, I flicked on my turn signal, hoping the car would continue on the highway. They didn't. They followed me into the rest stop. At this point, my hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I thought it might burst. The rest stop was completely empty, no other cars, no lights, just the faint glow from a flickering vending machine under the awning. I pulled into a parking spot, my mind racing. I didn't want to get out of the car, I couldn't trust whoever was behind me, but staying here with them felt even worse. I needed to make a decision. As soon as I parked, the car behind me pulled in and stopped a few spaces away, their headlights still blindingly bright. They just sat there, engine idling, not moving. I watched them through my rearview mirror, waiting for something to happen. But after a few tense moments, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, his hands shoved into his pockets. He didn't look toward my car. Instead, he walked slowly toward the restroom building, his head down like he was just another traveler stopping for a break. But something about the way he moved, the deliberate slowness, the way he never glanced in my direction, set off alarm bells in my head. He wasn't acting like someone who needed to use the restroom. He was too calm, too intentional. I couldn't stay there. I didn't care what he was planning. I wasn't going to stick around to find out. The moment he disappeared behind the restroom building, I slammed my car into reverse, backing out of the parking spot as fast as I could. My tires screeched as I turned back onto the highway, my heart racing as I floored the gas. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man come back out from behind the building, his head snapping toward my car as I sped away. But I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I drove for miles, glancing in my mirrors every few minutes, half expecting to see that car's headlights behind me again. But they never appeared. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into a well-lit gas station and parked, my hands still shaking. I stayed in the car for a long time, just trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that I was safe now. I never found out who that man was, or why he had followed me for so long. Maybe it was just some guy messing with me, trying to scare me for a laugh, or maybe it was something worse. I'll never know. But I do know this. I don't drive alone at night anymore.